What's up, guys? My name's Stephanie. I'm a certified herpetologist and reptile keeper. You're watching New Light Reptiles. Today we are going to be talking ball pythons and basically just all the things I wish I had known before getting a ball python. It's 2023 and there are a lot of new studies and ways of keeping ball pythons healthier than we have been in the past. So I'm just going to touch on those things today and then help you guys to decide whether or not a ball python is the right snake for you. I guess we need to start by me introducing you to this handsome fellow. This is Maynard. He is my approximately 5-year-old ball python, so he is relatively full grown. I'd say he's about 4 foot in length. When I got him though, he was a rescue and really underweight, so he is still kind of trying to bulk up a little bit, but he's looking really healthy for the most part. Maybe you guys are here today because you're considering getting a pet snake and maybe you're not sure what the right snake is for you and what the best type of snake would be as a beginner. And although I wouldn't necessarily consider a ball python an easy snake, they are really docile and they are great as pets. There just are a few things like their eating habits, etc., that make them a bit of a challenge. But if you're up for it and you've done plenty of research, they make amazing pet snakes. Ball pythons and corn snakes are considered the best starter snakes. The difference mainly between the two is going to be their behavior. A ball python, as you can see, is a bit more slow moving, a little bit more chilled out, relaxed. They are going to be a bit more girthier, a little bit bigger than your corn snake or smaller colubrids, where a corn snake is much more active. And these guys do tend to hide quite a bit more. They are nocturnal, so you probably won't see them out being super active during the day, but if you want something to kind of just chill with you and hang out on your shoulders like this, perfect snake. All right, so let's dive right into it. What is a ball python? Well, they're terrestrial snakes that come from Africa, places like Ghana. They typically live in burrows and termite mounds, though there are a lot of recent scientific studies showing that these guys will climb trees. They will hunt up from trees. As you can see, Maynard is already trying to show you guys that he does like to climb. They also are a constrictor species, which means that they constrict their prey to kill it before eating it. As far as size goes, typically males will generally be smaller than females. However, there are always outliers to this. Ball pythons normally range between the 3.5 to 5, even sometimes 6 foot range. And as I mentioned, the females are going to be closer to that 5 foot spot. As I said before, he is a male. He is full grown, so this is about as big as he's going to be. Ball pythons also are quite a commitment, as they typically can live between 15 to 30 years in captivity. So it is a big chunk of your lifetime that you would be spending with these guys. So that's something definitely to consider before getting one. There are a lot of different morphs and various colorations that they come in. Personally, I'm a huge advocate for rescue and adoption. Like Maynard here, he is a fantastic snake, and there are so many ball pythons that wind up in sanctuaries and listed on Craigslist. So normal ball pythons like this guy are gorgeous and super easy to find, and you can find them for pretty inexpensive because sadly, a lot of them are being rehomed. Okay, so if you do decide a ball python is the right snake for you, then the next thing we need to do is talk about what supplies you're going to need. Before getting any pet, it's so imperative that you have their enclosures set up before bringing home the animal. Make sure temperatures are in place and you have everything you need. Otherwise, you're going to have a very stressed out animal. If you have more reptiles at home, I also suggest doing a minimum of a 30-day quarantine setup. So having them in an enclosure on something like paper towel where you can monitor if there's mites or any other illnesses, and keeping it completely separate from your other reptiles. Otherwise, disease and viruses can spread and can wipe out your entire collection, which would be a horrible thing to happen to anyone. So, enclosure. The best size enclosure for these guys, whether you want to believe it or not, is going to be the bigger the better, with a 4x2x2 being the minimum for an adult ball python. There are a lot of breeders out there that will say things like, these are animals that do good in racks, or even small tanks like a 40-gallon breeder. They'll tell you things such as they get too overwhelmed with too much space and they get stressed out. They do better in small situations. I think when given the right opportunities, these guys will fully explore it. They definitely need that enrichment. They can become bored, and they are also nocturnal. So you're not going to see their real snake behaviors when you're sleeping at night. So it's likely that they're going to be out doing these things when you don't notice. I also really believe that the proper way to keep a snake, the ethical way, is to keep them in an enclosure that is at least long as your snake is. Snake should be able to fully stretch out. So now that we have the enclosure size figured out, we need to talk lighting and humidity. All reptiles do need a day and night cycle, so they do need a source of light as well as a source of heat. We have so many studies proving today that overhead heating is the best choice for all reptiles. It's just more natural. So I would avoid things like a heat mat and go for heat producing sources that are more natural and mimic the sun. So things like your halogen bulb or a deep heat projector, along with a UVB light source, is going to be ideal. There are many people that will also argue with me and say that UVB is not necessary for ball pythons. However, there are also many studies proving this to not be accurate as well. There will be many people to attest to the fact that they see their ball pythons being more active or doing cryptic basking because of the provided UVB. My personal opinion that all reptiles should be given UVB, but also hides where they can escape it if they would like to as well. The right UVB for a ball python is going to be something like an Arcadia T5 forest dweller. Always check your brand's website that you're buying a UVB from so that you can figure out the right distance and the right wattage for your species. Pretty much all the websites are going to have something on there so that you can figure this all out. Now that we've got the heat figured out and the lighting, the next step is to create a gradient in your enclosure so that there is a warm side and a cool side for your snake. Snakes are ectothermic, which means they use their environment to regulate their body temperatures. So they need to be able to move to a warm side when they need to warm up, move to a cool side when they need to cool down. Your warm side should be between about 86 to 90 degrees. The cool side should be anywhere from between about 72 degrees to about 80 degrees. It is also important to provide a nighttime drop in temperatures for your reptiles as well. This is natural. This is what they would experience in the wild. So if your house stays around 68 to 70 degrees, this is probably okay for your snake, and you don't need to provide any overhead nighttime heating. Always avoid colored bulbs. So The red light bulbs or the black light, blue light, just stay away from them. Your snake can see them. It will disrupt their circadian rhythm. If it's winter and really chilly in your house, you can provide something like a deep heat projector or a ceramic heat emitter that does not put off any light and will not disrupt your snake's sleep cycle. All right, so next up is humidity. These guys do need quite a high amount of humidity, which can be difficult for some people living in places like me where it tends to be pretty dry. So I am definitely misting often. Humidity needs to be between about 60 to 80%, preferably higher at nighttime, which it generally will be once you turn off the heat. There are a lot of great things that you can do to try and get that humidity up. You can install a reptile mister, which comes on intermittently throughout the day and sprays down your reptile's enclosure. Using substrate like cocoa husk or natural topsoil with moss and leaf litter can also help hold that humidity. Plants, clutter, etc. These are great ways to try and keep that humidity up. So next we need to talk about substrate and enrichment and hides in their enclosure. Basically everything you're going to be putting inside of their new house to keep them healthy and happy. For substrate, I really recommend going as naturalistic as possible. I typically do a mix of organic topsoil and cocoa fiber, cocoa husk, and then leaf litter on top of that, a little bit of moss. If you don't want to go through the hassle of making your own substrate, there are some really great brands out there that do sell substrate that is perfect for these guys, just like the BioDude Terra Firma. Their substrate is fantastic. I have used it before and it works wonderfully. Do avoid things like aspen, as that is not a good bedding for a ball python, especially with their need of high humidity. Aspen can definitely mold and cause some serious issues for your pet. Now, as far as what you can add to their enclosure for enrichment, they absolutely do need to have at least 2 hides in their enclosure, one on the cool end, one on the warm end. But if you want to provide more, that's a great thing. As I mentioned before, some ball pythons do like to climb a little bit. So I think adding things like sticks and things to climb on is a great idea for enrichment for them. Decide to find branches out in nature, just make sure you are not using cedar or pine, as these are toxic. And make sure you're disinfecting as well. You can disinfect by baking it in the oven at 200 degrees or using white vinegar and scalding hot water. Types of enrichment, I think live plants are a wonderful thing, but if you don't want to deal with that upkeep, you can get fake plants at places like the dollar store or craft supply stores, stuff like that. And you can even get ones that look really realistic and will still provide the same enrichment. All right, next up, we need to talk about diet. So these guys are carnivores and they do eat whole prey items. Things like mice when they're smaller, rats, chicks, quail, generally the typical types of prey that you can find to feed your ball python. My suggestion is to definitely aim for feeding frozen thawed. It is just safer for your snake. They're not in risk of being injured. If you are feeding live, you are feeding an animal that knows it's being attacked and it will fight back. I just believe that frozen thawed is the most overall humane method of feeding. I do understand there are some circumstances where this just can't happen. So if you do have to feed live, just make sure you're supervising your snake and not inducing any type of injury. Now that we're also talking diet, I also recommend having a scale, something just like a normal food scale that people have for their kitchens. is a good way to monitor your snake. Take their weight every month, make sure they're not gaining too much weight too fast or losing weight rapidly. If it seems pretty steady, then you know you're doing a good job with feeding. Also, as far as selecting your prey size, the general rule of thumb is to select something that is as wide as your snake is at its widest part. So a rat that's about that big around is something that's going to be good for Maynard. He typically eats a medium-sized rat. When these guys are young, they are going to be eating about once every 7 days, and then that slows down over time, generally between the 1 year to 3 year mark. They'll eat about every 14 days, and then as adults, about every 3 to 4 weeks. So now that you know just the very basics of what owning a ball python will entail, it's important to also make sure you do have an exotic vet for your animal. It's irresponsible to have a pet knowing that there's not anywhere that you can take it if it does become injured or sick. And one of the biggest tips that I can give you as a reptile keeper is that things in this community is always changing, improving, and growing. So having reptiles, I feel like it's so important to be constantly researching, constantly learning, and it is a big commitment. Just please be sure you know what you're signing up for before you bring one of these guys home. But other than that, I think they are amazing. I think they're very underrated as pets in the reptile community. They're great in my opinion as a family snake to have around children. They're very, very docile for the most part. They are shy and do get scared, but they're extremely gentle and easygoing, at least in my experience, and I think they make amazing pets. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. If you like this video, please subscribe and hit the thumbs up button. Leave comments below as well for any future videos that you'd like to see. We will be doing videos weekly about reptiles. So can't wait to see y'all next week.